If you just want to access the L hammer blades and the rectangular hammer blades, you can remove the hopper by removing all of these 13 millimeter nuts. All of these bolts that are on the blades are a 6 millimeter hex Allen head. If you do want to access the chipper blades, which are back behind the shroud, then you've got to remove all of these 13 millimeter nuts all the way around. And then also, because you're separating the wheels from the engine, you want to put some support underneath so that when you separate it, it doesn't collapse on you. When you put your blocks in here, you want to make sure you leave some space so that you can access the nuts on the bolt. I've loosened all these up. Now I'm just going to use my drill to get the nuts off the rest of the way. I intentionally left one nut and bolt at the top and one at the bottom, just so it doesn't unexpectedly collapse or separate on me while I'm disassembling it. So now I'll just remove these two, and then the wheels along with this shroud will come off. The last nut and bolt. So now the shroud and the wheels are off. Then you have your chipper blades, and there are two of them, and you definitely want to pay attention to the orientation of the blade, because you definitely don't want to put them on backwards and find out the hard way, because then you gotta disassemble it all over again and fix the orientation. There's one. And there's two. I didn't say it up front, but you definitely want to make sure the on-off switch is in the off position, and also disconnect your spark plug just so it doesn't miraculously start up on you. Two nuts that are on the bolts that hold the chipper blade on are 13 millimeter. When you're removing the chipper blades, you're going to need something that's going to keep the wheel in place while you're removing these two 13 millimeter nuts. In my case, I just used a hammer, and there's these holes that are on the wheel, so I just stuck the hammer in there, which keeps the wheel from spinning while I remove these nuts. One of the things that you're going to find when you try to remove these two 13 millimeter nuts is that the Allen bolt is difficult to access, and these will not completely come off unless you get an Allen wrench and put it on there. So the best way to do that is to remove the branch feed chute, take out these three 13 millimeter bolts, and then rotate your blade to here so that you can put your Allen wrench on there so that you can remove these 13 millimeter nuts from the Allen bolt. So now that this piece is removed, you have access to the Allen heads of the bolts. If you're trying to create leverage to prevent the wheel from turning, don't stick a screwdriver or something through here to get your leverage, because you could potentially damage the blade and then have to do more work to sharpen it. It's best just to use the holes that are on the wheel to create your leverage. In case you're wondering why I have the red arrow pointing down, it's just to make sure that while I'm putting it on, because you could inadvertently put it on the wrong way. So the arrow, just for my reference, means that the blade tip needs to be pointing down when I put it back on. Just in case you're not aware, so the blades that are here, and there's only two of them, one on each side, these are the blades that feed through the branch feeder, and these blades are what chop the branches up. And then these blades, the rectangular blade and the L-shaped blade, are going to be the ones that continue to chop it before it goes out the discharge chute. If you know for sure that you only want to access the L-shaped hammer blades or the rectangular hammer blades, then the only thing that you do need to remove is this portion. If you know that ultimately you're going to want to access the chipper blades, then the best thing to do, while this is still connected to this, just remove all the bolts on this portion of it and take the whole piece off as a whole, rather than taking that off and then taking that off. It's just easier. Just take these bolts off of this portion and remove that whole part of the chipper shredder. These are the tools that I used. Pry bar, just to wedge in here to prevent the wheel from spinning. The hammer, basically the same thing, just place through here, prevent the wheel from turning. A ratchet, just to loosen up the nuts on the bolts, and then follow up using drill with a 13mm socket to remove the majority of the nuts. I do have an extension on here, might seem a little excessive, but there are some spots where it's got a little bit of reach, so it works, and it was handy, so I grabbed it. 2 Allen wrenches, 6mm and a 5mm. The 6mm will be for these Allen bolts, and then the 5 will be to remove the chipper blade bolts. And also 13mm wrench, and then a 10mm socket if you want to remove the clean out panel. Those bolts are 10mm. This is one of the chipper blades removed, and I'm sure that if you have any skill at sharpening blades, you may want to be tempted to make this as sharp and pointed as possible. Just in my opinion, since this is a blade that's spinning, and it's, you know, a pretty thick blade, I would say that you definitely don't want to make it sharper by basically grinding this off and making this sharper, thinking that it's going to be more efficient. I think that the weight, the bulk of the blade, and the fact that it's spinning, that it's best to keep the blade sharpened at the same angle, so that you do still have the mass of the blade, because if you do make it thinner, you run the risk, since you more than likely are going to put a bunch of branches through the feeder, that if you make this too sharp, or too sharp of an angle, you're going to make this thinner, which is going to cause the blade to dull faster. So, as I said, in my opinion, it's best just to keep it at the same angle, grind it to sharpen it, but just don't go crazy on trying to make it as sharp as possible by changing the angle of the cut on the blade. Going to put these chipper blades back on, making sure that the sharp edge is to the outside and pointed down, like with the arrow that I put on here earlier. Alright, so now I've got the rectangular blades put back on. I've got the L-shaped blades put back on, and also the chipper blades. I have an issue with this one L-shaped hammer blade. It's supposed to spin freely, but it's getting locked right up in here. It wants to stay there, but it's supposed to move just as easily as this one. So I smooth this out here. Hopefully that'll fix the issue. I got that fixed so it spins freely now. So all my blades are back on, they're all sharpened, and I just put the feed chute back on. And you can put this on once you get all the blades back on. And then from there, just need to put the wheels and the shroud back on, and then put the hopper back on. Please like, comment, or subscribe. Thanks again.